Most fathers mark their lives by birthdays, report cards, and first games. But for David Miller, time was measured in waiting rooms, test results, and the countless moments he never got back. For 2 long months, his son Sam had lain silent in a hospital bed. Not a word. Not a sound. Until the morning a quiet girl with taped-up sneakers walked into his room and spoke. Her name was Lila Carter. That small visit, so ordinary on the surface, set off a chain of events no one could have seen coming, paths crossing, wounds reopening, and the very definition of family being rewritten. Stay with this story until the end, because you'll see how a stranger's soft presence gave a father one last chance to show up. And sometimes the stars we spend our lives chasing aren't up above at all. They're right here, within reach. David stepped off the hospital elevator with the dull, practiced numbness that routine had built into him. The 7th floor no longer felt like a place where children healed. It was more like a hallway where families surrendered. He didn't even stop at the front desk. The nurses no longer greeted him anyway. They knew his rhythm by now. 3 visits a week. Always after 5. Always in a press suit untouched by the real world. Always with a paper cup of coffee in hand, guilt disguised as caffeine. Sam's door was already cracked open. David pushed it gently, bracing himself for the usual sight, his son lying still, pale against hospital sheets, machines doing all the work, blinking and beeping like they cared more than he could. But this time the bed was empty. The blankets were wrinkled, the wires gone. For a moment, his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. Was Sam transferred? Did he walk into the wrong room? Had the doctors moved him without telling anyone? And then a darker thought slipped in, the one he never dared voice. His chest tightened, his throat clamped shut. He spun around and stormed into the hall, shouting for anyone who could answer. A nurse appeared, calm but cautious, as though she had seen panic like this 100 times. She lifted her hand slightly, a signal for him to breathe. "Mr. Miller," she said, reading the name off his badge. "Your son woke up this morning." The words nearly knocked him over. Woke up? That wasn't scheduled, that wasn't in any plan. Sam hadn't so much as twitched in over 60 days. He what? He woke up and no one called me? David's voice cracked. The nurse didn't falter. It happened early. He was groggy, confused. But a girl was with him. Said her name was Lila Carter. David froze. A girl? She was just reading to him. Talking. And when he stirred, he responded. The rest of her words blurred, something about moving Sam for observation, his vitals being stable. But none of that mattered. Only 2 things did. His son had finally woken up, and David hadn't been there. He had missed it. He had traded that once-in-a-lifetime moment for a sterile meeting room in Chicago, celebrating a deal over an overpriced glass of bourbon while convincing himself every absence was for Sam's future. Now, a name rang in his head like an unsolvable riddle. Lila Carter. Who was she? How had she gotten into that room? Why had she been the one Sam saw first? He hated how quickly his thoughts turned suspicious, as if kindness had to come with strings. But worse than that, he hated the thought that while he was shaking hands with board members, someone else had been there, present, when his son returned. When David was finally allowed into Sam's recovery room, the boy was propped up slightly, eyelids heavy, but awake. Awake. He turned his head, slow but deliberate. That tiny motion almost dropped David to his knees. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, not sure his voice would hold. Sam's lips moved. No sound, just effort. Connection. Presence. A response. David sank into the chair beside him, hands shaking. "You scared me half to death," he murmured. Sam blinked, and for a split second, there was the shadow of a smile. David didn't move for a long time. He just stayed, soaking in the impossible. He didn't dare push too hard. For once, it was enough simply to be there. But underneath the wonder, the same question pounded louder. Who was Lila Carter? What had she said that reached his son in ways David had forgotten how to? Later, walking out into the fading light of evening, guilt gnawed at him deeper than ever. Not the guilt of a father who had done something catastrophic, but the kind that sneaks in by degrees, by every small absence until presence itself disappears. Lila had been there. A stranger. And now her name was tied forever to Sam's first steps back toward life. David didn't check his phone. He didn't care about missed calls. All he could think about was a girl he had never met, who had done what he could not. He sat behind the wheel of his car, but didn't drive. He just repeated her name in his head like a code he couldn't crack. Lila Carter. The next day, he found himself parked outside the high school the nurse had mentioned. He hadn't asked permission, hadn't called anyone, hadn't thought it through. He had just gone. When the final bell rang, teenagers spilled out in bursts of noise and energy. And then he saw her. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She walked with a quiet invisibility, a faded backpack slung over her shoulder, it seemed patched with duct tape. Her sneakers were battered. Her hoodie hung loose. David stepped into her path before he could lose his nerve. "Lila?" he asked carefully. She stopped, steady eyes meeting his. "Yeah. I'm David Miller," he said quickly, his throat dry. "Sam's father." A flicker crossed her face, acknowledgement, but not surprise. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. She gave the smallest shrug. "We're already talking." For the first time in days, David almost smiled. There was no performance in her. Just truth. "I just wanted to thank you," he began. "You don't have to," she cut in quietly. "I just talked to him, that's all." "You were there when he woke up." "Yeah." A pause. Then, softer. "I was reading." "Reading?" "About stars," she said simply. "Galaxies and stuff. It's my favorite book." David blinked at her, caught off guard by the plainness of it. No mystical story. No miracle claim. Just a girl, a book, and his son. "Why did you? I mean, what made you sit with him?" he asked. She hesitated. Looked like she might walk away. Then she said, "He was alone." "I don't know. I just stayed." "You didn't even know him?" "No." She shifted the strap on her backpack. "But he looked like somebody who needed someone there. That's all." There was no self-congratulation in her voice, just certainty. David walked with her as she crossed toward the bus stop. She didn't tell him to leave. She didn't offer more. But for the first time, he felt something stir inside him, a realization he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "You said you read about stars?" David asked. Lila nodded, biting the inside of her cheek, like she wasn't sure if he was trying to make fun of her. "I like space," she said finally. "It's quiet. Huge. But not empty. Everything out there matters, even if it's far away." David let the words settle, nodding slowly. "That's what you read to him?" "Yeah," she replied. "He didn't say much. But he looked peaceful. So I kept going." It hit David then, she wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't working for his approval. She didn't even care what he thought. And maybe that was the key. Maybe that's why Sam had stirred. Because with Lila, there was no attempt to fix or cure or force. Just presence. He noticed the way she stood, still, steady, like she'd learned early on how to make herself small in a world that rarely noticed her. "What's your family like?" David asked, curiosity nudging through his guarded tone. "Just me and my mom," Lila answered. "What does she do?" "She works here," Lila said, almost like an afterthought. "She's one of the janitors." The words struck him harder than he expected. He'd imagined Lila as just some random kid, maybe part of a volunteer program, maybe in the wrong place at the right time. But this was different. She had no permission, no title, no agenda. She wasn't supposed to be in that room at all. Yet she had seen a boy lying alone and decided he shouldn't be. And she stayed. David tried to picture himself as a teenager, boarding schools, fancy sports camps, new gadgets shipped from Europe. He couldn't remember one single time he had sat in silence with another person simply because it mattered. Not once without being told, rewarded, or expected. "Does your mom know you go?" he asked. Lila shrugged. "She knows I visit sometimes. I don't tell her much." "Why not?" "She worries," Lila said softly. "About me. About money. About staying invisible." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a worn-out kind of understanding. They waited in silence until the bus pulled up, brakes squealing. Before stepping on, Lila turned back to him. "You don't have to follow me. I'm not trying to get anything from you." Her words landed like a stone in his chest. Not harsh, not defensive, just true. "I know," David said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand." "There's nothing to understand," she replied. He was lonely. "I know what that feels like." She climbed the steps, took a seat by the window. David didn't wave. Didn't call out. He just stood there, watching her face blur behind dirty glass as the bus pulled away. Her words echoed in him. Sam had been lonely. And she knew what that felt like. And the worst part, the part that gnawed deeper than any failed deal or missed call, was that she was right. His son had been lonely, and David hadn't noticed. What shook him most wasn't her defiance or her mystery. It was her calm. The way she had sat beside Sam for hours, reading about galaxies she'd never touch, giving him everything while expecting nothing. It was a stillness David had long forgotten how to give. Back in his car, reality pressed in. Not just that Sam had woken up, but that he had done so in the presence of someone who owed him nothing, a girl who gave freely without even meaning to remind David of everything he'd lost in the chase for more. The doctors had warned him not to expect too much, too fast. That finding words again after silence would be slow, uncertain. And yet one afternoon, when David said her name, Sam's lips formed a whisper. "Lila." Not a question. A request. David froze, throat tight. "Do you want me to call her?" Sam gave the smallest nod, barely visible, but loud enough to rattle David's entire world. So he did. He called the school, left messages through the janitorial office, not even sure they'd reach her. But the next day, she walked through the hospital's sliding doors like it was routine. No hesitation. No fuss. She only glanced at David briefly, gave him a small nod, and went straight into Sam's room. David didn't follow right away. He lingered outside, the air heavy with something he couldn't name. When he finally stepped inside, Lila was already sitting by the bed, pulling a folded piece of paper from her warm backpack. Sam's face lit up, not with a grin, but with a brightness David hadn't seen in months. "I made you something," she told him. Her voice was soft, deliberate. She unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing it flat. "It's a star chart. Northern Hemisphere mostly. See? The summer triangle, Vega, Deneb, Altair." Sam's lips formed the names, faint but clear. Lila smiled and marked a spot on the chart with her pen. "This one's yours," she said. "Sam's star. It's not real, but it could be." Sam's hand brushed the paper like it was fragile treasure. "That's Orion," she continued, pointing. "Winter skies. Big belt of 3 stars. My mom says he looks like someone searching for something. Maybe peace." David stayed in the corner, silent. Watching. Not daring to intrude on the rhythm between them. "And that's Cassiopeia, the queen in the sky," Lila added. "She's always upside down, depending on the season. I like that. She changes, but never disappears." Her words weren't rehearsed. She wasn't performing. She was simply offering pieces of the universe, as if anyone willing to look up had a right to them. And Sam, who had spent months in silence, drank it in like medicine. At one point, his hand lifted weakly and touched her wrist. "Thank you," he whispered. David heard it. Lila did too. She didn't react with surprise, just nodded. "You're welcome," she said, as if kindness didn't need to be celebrated, it just needed to be given. Betelgeuse, she continued. It's huge, might go supernova any time. But it could have already happened. The light just takes so long to reach us, we'd never know. Sam blinked. Dead star? Kind of, she said softly. But its light keeps going. That's how I think it is with people, too. The important ones. Even after they're gone, their light keeps moving. David sank into a chair, not from exhaustion, but because something inside him cracked open. He felt small, not in shame, but in awe, like standing at the edge of something vast. Eventually, Lila stood. I've got school tomorrow, she said gently. Sam's eyes clung to her. Come back? Of course, she whispered, tucking the star chart into his lap. Keep this. Look at it when I'm not here. Sam clutched it with trembling hands like it was more than paper, like it was hope itself. David watched her turn to go. She glanced at him, just once. No smile. No words. Just quiet acknowledgement. And he realized there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound hollow. After she left, David sat beside Sam, staring at the star map held tightly in his son's hands. He thought of all the gifts he'd bought, gadgets, trips, distractions, and how none of them had sparked this light in Sam's eyes. What his son needed wasn't more. It wasn't noise. It was presence. And it had taken a girl with duct-tape sneakers to remind him. David Miller, the man who had spent a lifetime mastering negotiations, leading billion-dollar deals, and bending the world to his plans, realized, in that quiet room, how powerless he was. He wasn't the center of this moment. He wasn't even close. He was simply a witness. And for the first time in years, that was enough. And so he kept coming back. At first, he told himself it was because of Sam's recovery. But deep down, he knew the truth was Messier. It wasn't just Sam that pulled David back to the hospital day after day. It was Lila, too. The way she spoke to his son without forcing anything. The way she simply sat beside him, not trying to fix him, not trying to cheer him up, just being there. David found himself watching her more than he wanted to admit. Sometimes it felt like he was intruding on something private, like he was a guest in his own son's recovery. And yet he didn't stop. On the days when Lila couldn't make it, school exams, her mother's late shifts, Sam always seemed quieter, withdrawn, like some light inside him dimmed without her. The boy was healing, yes. But the real restoration, the spark, the connection, that came alive only when she was near. David, with all his resources and intentions, couldn't recreate it. So instead of trying, he surrendered to it. He waited on the sidelines, offering snacks, fresh water, quiet company. Sometimes Lila glanced at him, mildly curious, but most of the time she stayed fixed on Sam, their strange, wordless understanding growing deeper while David stood by, unsure where he belonged anymore. At school, David tried something different. One Tuesday morning, he brought Maria a cup of coffee. He wasn't sure if it would come off as kind or condescending, but Maria accepted it with a cautious smile, brushing her hand against her janitor's uniform before taking it. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," David replied. "But I wanted to." They stood in an awkward pause before he finally asked, "Has Lila always been like that?" Maria tilted her head. "Like what?" "So steady with Sam." "With people." Maria thought for a moment, sipping her coffee. "Lila's always been old in the heart. She notices things most people miss. She doesn't speak much, unless it matters." David just nodded. Normally, conversations were weapons for him, tools for persuasion, strategy, progress. But this was different. He was asking about someone else's daughter for no reason other than wanting to understand. That day, he learned Maria had come from Guatemala 12 years earlier. That Lila had been reading since she was 4. That they lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls. Maria didn't complain. She spoke plainly, like her daughter, no excuses, no explanations. And somehow, that humbled David more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon, outside the school library, David caught Lila as she was packing her duct-tape backpack. He hesitated, then said, "I wanted to thank you." She didn't look up right away, just zipped the bag carefully, making sure not to tug on the fraying seam. "For what?" she asked. "For being there. For Sam." She straightened and looked at him. Not dismissive, not warm either, just that steady gaze of hers, like she was measuring not the words, but the weight behind them. "He was lonely," she said simply. "I know what that feels like." David waited, expecting more, maybe a story, a clue about her life, something he could follow. But she gave him nothing else. Just that single truth, dropped like a stone in still water. She didn't flinch under his silence. She didn't soften it or apologize. She just adjusted the strap on her backpack, gave him a small nod, and walked away. And David, a man who had once built a career getting people to say more than they meant, found himself silenced. He realized Lila didn't speak in code. She said what she meant. And the problem was, he wasn't used to that. That night, after Sam fell asleep early, David sat alone in his apartment. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt like a mirror. He poured himself a glass of wine, took one sip, then set it down untouched. On impulse, he pulled out an old flash drive he hadn't opened since the accident. Inside were photos, videos, fragments of a life that once felt whole. He clicked a folder, Beach Trip 2017. The screen lit up with motion. Sam, 3 years younger, running through shallow surf, laughter spilling from him like sunlight. And Anna, his wife, chasing him, hair wild in the wind, laughing louder than he remembered. Her voice echoed in the room, vibrant and alive, almost too alive to bear. David leaned back, watching a version of himself holding the camera, laughing, calling out to Sam with words that now felt foreign in his own mouth. "Buddy," he heard himself say on the video. And he realized with horror, he couldn't remember the last time he'd said it out loud. He didn't even know what Sam's laugh sounded like now. Not really. It had changed, deeper, quieter, or maybe just absent. And he'd been too far away to notice. The video kept rolling. Anna kneeling beside Sam when he cried over a broken seashell. Not fixing, not rushing, just holding him. Just being. And suddenly David saw it clearly. Lila hadn't stepped into a role that wasn't hers. She had stepped into the vacancy he had left behind. He didn't spiral into self-blame. No theatrics. But the truth struck him like gravity, undeniable, inescapable. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped knowing his son. Somewhere between endless board meetings and sterile hospital visits, he had convinced himself that physical presence was enough. But it wasn't. Presence wasn't proximity. Presence was attention. And Lila, with nothing but a worn backpack and a quiet heart, had given Sam the one thing David had forgotten how to give. It wasn't fate. It wasn't magic. It was intention. And it was devastatingly simple. David paused the video on a single still frame, Anna with her arm around Sam, both laughing mid-motion, caught forever in a moment that felt like another universe. Not just the past, but a version of himself who had once known how to be whole. He shut the laptop and sat back in the dim kitchen light, feeling something shift inside. Not a revelation, not a plan. Just the sting of recognition. He didn't know Lila well. He didn't yet fully understand what Sam needed. But one thing was clear, he hadn't just lost his wife. Somewhere along the way, he had lost his son too. And maybe, without even realizing it, he had started losing himself. Sam's recovery moved like the tide, slow, uneven, sometimes pulling back, sometimes pushing forward, but never stopping. Doctors called it promising, but cautious. David stopped focusing on the metrics. Instead, he started watching the little things. How Sam stayed awake a bit longer each visit. How he whispered questions now instead of retreating into silence. But most of all, how different Sam was whenever Lila entered the room. Her presence shifted something invisible. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet tilt of gravity, pulling him back to life. One day, David walked in to find them surrounded by scraps of colored paper. Lila was helping Sam fold strips into rings, taping them together in a lopsided circle. "Saturn," she said. "The rings are made of ice and dust. Like memories, they don't disappear. They just float around you." Sam grinned, a real grin, and added another ring. On another afternoon, they taped paper stars to the ceiling tiles. Each one had a story, a name, a wish. David asked about the red one. "Hope," Lila answered without hesitation. She never babysat Sam. Never talked down to him. When he fumbled the glue stick or stumbled over a word, she didn't correct him with pity. She just waited. She gave him space. And Sam rose to meet her steadiness in ways David couldn't explain. One afternoon, after folding planets and labeling constellations, Sam looked up at her. "What would Earth be without the moon?" he asked. "Off balance," Lila replied. "The tides would be wrong. We'd spin too fast. Nothing would feel steady." David, sitting in the corner, froze. Her words weren't just science. They were truth. Sam needed her. She had become his moon, constant, unassuming, holding him in orbit without trying to shine. David felt both grateful and unworthy. This teenage girl was doing what all the doctors, all the therapy, all the money hadn't managed. Bringing his son back, one star at a time. And she had never asked for anything. It was a rainy Thursday when David offered her a ride. Her sweatshirt was soaked through, her backpack sagging. Maria wouldn't be off until late. Lila hesitated, weighing his words. "I'm not trying to cross a line," David said. "Just a ride. Nothing more." She studied him, then nodded. "Okay." The drive was mostly silent. She stared out the window, watching raindrops chase each other across the glass until David asked quietly, "Do you always take the bus this late?" "Yeah," she shrugged. "Or walk. Depends if my mom's working a double." When they reached her building, she gave him directions, upstairs, over the corner store. He parked in front of a narrow door wedged between a convenience shop and a shuttered laundromat. The musty smell of damp drywall grew stronger as they climbed the stairs. Lila unlocked the door, flicked on the light. The apartment was small, just enough space for a table, a couch, and a twin mattress shoved against the wall. A pot sat beneath a steady leak in the corner. A stack of unopened bills lay on the table. David didn't say anything. He just stood there, taking it in, quiet shock spreading through him. Lila, unfazed, emptied her backpack on the table. "It's not a big deal," she said, as if she could read his thoughts. "We've been here a long time. It's home." David nodded, his eyes flicking toward the steady drip from the ceiling. "Have you told the landlord?" Lila shrugged. "He's slow." Then, motioning toward a strip of duct tape above the window, she added, "We fix what we can. It's just water." David's first instinct was to jump in, to call someone, to write a check and fix it that very night. But the look on her face told him any attempt in the wrong way would be rejected. Just then, the back door opened and Maria stepped in, shaking rain from her arms. She stopped short at the sight of David in her home. Surprise flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by a guarded smile. He rose, uncertain, and offered his hand. "You raised someone remarkable," he said. Maria's smile softened, though her face carried the weight of long years. "She raised herself, too," she replied. Then, gently, as if quoting an old rule, she added, "We don't take charity. We take care." The words hit him harder than he expected. Not defensive. Not bitter. Just honest. David nodded, choosing not to argue. He could have rattled off resources, offered contacts, insisted on helping. But he understood now, this wasn't about what he could give. It was about what they chose to keep. And what they valued was dignity, not rescue. Later, in his car, with rain tapping against the windshield, David sat in silence. He thought about the paper planets drying back at the hospital, Saturn's crooked rings held together by tape. He thought about the way Sam had looked at Lila, as if she carried his entire sky in that battered backpack of hers. And he thought about Maria's words, "We take care," and all the layers they carried. For a man who had built his life around control, schedules, and measurable outcomes, this moment felt like standing at the edge of something he couldn't quantify. Maybe fixing wasn't the point. Maybe showing up differently was. That night, after Sam was asleep and the apartment had gone still, David sat at his desk and opened his laptop. Without overthinking, without drafting a strategy, he typed. To the board, I'm requesting an extended leave, effective immediately. My son needs me. And I need this time. He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he sat back, listening to the quiet. For once, there was no flight to catch, no meeting in the morning. Just time. And maybe, if he was lucky, a second chance. The first day, Lila didn't come. Sam barely reacted, only asked once in a thin voice. Is she coming later? David gave him something vague, assuming she was delayed. The second day, Sam seemed dimmer. He didn't want to build planets, didn't touch the star chart. When David suggested taking him outside for some sun, Sam shook his head and rolled toward the wall. By the third day, the silence grew heavy. Sam spoke less, and when he did, the words sounded hollow, like echoes instead of intent. David called the school, the front office, even the janitorial department, asking if Maria or Lila had missed shifts. If something had happened. No real answers. Family emergency, maybe, one secretary said. That was it. But the absence wasn't just felt by Sam. David felt it too, like the scaffolding they'd been building together had suddenly vanished, leaving the rest of them straining not to collapse. On the fifth day, David left the hospital early. He told the nurse he had to check on something, and drove across town to the school just as dismissal poured kids onto the sidewalk like a flood. He scanned the crowd. No sign of her. He was about to step into the front office when he noticed someone sitting alone near the curb. Knees pulled tight, face hidden in her folded arms. It was Lila. She wasn't crying, but the way she curled in on herself told him enough. David approached slowly, careful not to startle her. When he stopped beside her, she glanced up once, saw his face, then tucked her head back down. He didn't press. Didn't ask questions. He just lowered himself beside her, arms on his thighs, matching her silence. He didn't have answers or advice. For once, being there felt like the only true thing to do. Minutes passed before she finally spoke. They came to our apartment, she whispered. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion. ICE. 2 agents. Said it was routine. Wanted to ask questions about my mom. David stayed quiet, letting her lead. They didn't arrest her. They didn't touch her. Just looked around, asked for documents, took pictures of mail, said they'd follow up. Her fingers picked at the frayed sleeve of her hoodie. She held it together until they left. Then she cried. I've never seen her cry before. Silence stretched. Then she added, without looking at him, I didn't want to see Sam like this. Scared. Angry. I thought I'd mess it up. Something shifted in David's chest, rage at a system that could treat people like threats for existing, and helplessness because no quick fix could erase her fear. He reached out, lightly resting a hand on her shoulder. You being there for Sam, that's never messing it up, he said. She didn't answer. But she didn't move away. The hardest part, David realized, was that Lila wasn't asking for anything, not help, not protection, not comfort. She was just carrying it all. Her mother's fear. The uncertainty. The weight of choosing absence over peace because she didn't want her dread to spill into the only place she felt steady. That kind of burden didn't belong on a teenager's shoulders. And yet she wore it like armor, thin, cracked, but armor all the same. They might come back, she murmured. I don't know what happens then. What if they take her? She didn't cry. Her voice didn't waver. But her knuckles whitened as she gripped her sleeves. David didn't answer right away. He couldn't offer false promises. But he could offer presence. "We'll figure it out," he said gently. "You're not alone in this. You're not." For the first time, she looked at him. Her eyes were glassy but steady. And in that flicker, David saw the truth. She was just a girl trying to hold her world together as it threatened to split apart. They sat longer than either expected. The lot emptied. The noise faded. David never once checked his phone. He didn't think about emails or deals. Only the girl beside him, the one who had carried his son through darkness, and now sat unraveling under a weight she should never have had to bear. When she finally stood, he rose too. She gave him a small nod, not thanks, not goodbye, just a quiet acknowledgement, and walked toward the bus stop. David didn't follow. He stood there, watching until she disappeared, the echo of her words heavy in his chest. He thought of Maria, crying after the agents left. He thought of Lila choosing to stay away, not out of indifference, but out of love. And he thought of Sam, who had asked about her every day with hope in his eyes. David could no longer stand to disappoint. That night, sitting beside his son's hospital bed, David made a vow he didn't speak aloud. Lawyers, favors, paperwork, whatever it took, he would make sure Lila never had to carry that fear again. No one was going to make her feel unprotected. Not while he had any say. He didn't tell Maria. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because he knew she'd refuse. Not out of pride, but principle. The same quiet strength that made her turn down charity, even when the ceiling leaked and the fridge hummed weakly. So he made the call privately. Reached out to an old colleague who owed him a favor, connected with an immigration attorney named Angela Cho. She listened, asked questions, then said, "I can't promise anything. But I'll try harder than anyone else." That was enough. David paid the retainer himself. Asked for confidentiality. He didn't tell Lyle either. Not yet. This wasn't about credit. It was about protecting the girl who had brought light back into his son's life. That same week, David arranged something he'd been avoiding for too long. An outing with Sam. Not to the courtyard or the therapy room, but to the pier. The place they'd gone almost every Saturday before life fell apart. The doctors agreed reluctantly, as long as Sam stayed in his chair and the trip was short. Sam hadn't been outside in over 3 months. When David wheeled him onto the pier, the ocean wind hit his face and Sam blinked hard against the brightness, as if it stung. "You okay?" David asked softly. "Yeah," Sam murmured. "Just a lot." They sat by the railing, the sea stretching wide in front of them. David handed him a small paper bag. Inside were 2 still warm churros, their old tradition. Sam smiled faintly. "You remembered?" David nodded. "I never forgot." For the first time in what felt like years, the silence between father and son wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was open, waiting. "So," he asked, "you want to talk about anything?" Sam didn't answer right away. He bit into his chew, chewed slowly, then stared down at his lap. His voice came out soft, but steady. "I remember the crash." David froze. He hadn't known if Sam remembered anything at all about that day. "We were coming home from the park," Sam continued. "Mom was singing. She was laughing at me 'cause I messed up the words." His voice wavered. David kept quiet. He didn't dare interrupt. "I saw the truck," Sam whispered. "It was fast. Loud. Mom yelled my name. Then, nothing. Just black. But it wasn't scary. It was like floating." David's throat burned. He wanted to reach for him, but he forced himself to stay still, to let the words come. "When I was asleep, when I was gone," Sam said, turning his tired eyes toward his father, "I thought maybe if I didn't wake up, I'd get to see her again." The words hit David like a punch straight to the chest. His hands gripped the sides of the bench. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "For everything, for not being there the way you needed. For making you feel like leaving was better than staying." Sam didn't reply, but he let his head fall against his father's shoulder. And in that quiet moment, David realized words weren't always needed. They sat there for a long while, listening to gulls calling overhead, the hum of strangers passing by, and the slow tide beneath them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some sweeping movie moment. But it was real. And real was enough. On the way back, Sam asked softly, "Do you think Lila's okay?" David nodded. "She's strong. Stronger than most grown-ups I know." Sam smiled faintly. "She makes things feel less heavy." David agreed, though he kept it to himself. Because the truth was, Lila hadn't just lightened Sam's world. She'd lifted his, too. She'd shown them both a kind of steady presence he hadn't realized he was missing until it was impossible to ignore. That night, after Sam had drifted to sleep clutching the star chart Lila had once made him, David sat alone at his kitchen table. A blank sheet of stationery lay in front of him. He didn't type. He didn't dictate. He wrote by hand. Slowly. Carefully. The pen felt strange in his grip, like it was asking him to be someone he hadn't been in a long time. He didn't write about lawyers or hospital days or the accident. He didn't list achievements or debts of gratitude. Instead, he wrote something simple. Something honest. A letter not from a businessman, or even a widower, but from a father trying to start over. "Thank you. Not for saving my son's life, but for giving me another chance to be his father. You reminded me who he is, and who I still have time to be." He signed it, folded the page, slid it into an envelope. No stamp. No address. Just a promise he'd give it to her one day, when the moment was right. It wasn't closure. It was a door. And he had only just stepped through. Maria didn't raise her voice when she confronted him. She didn't need to. Her words carried their own weight. It happened outside the school one Thursday morning. She was waiting near the side entrance, arms folded, face set but calm. David had just dropped off her usual coffee. But this time, there was no polite thank you. Instead, she said firmly, "We need to talk." He knew instantly. This wasn't about schedules or updates on Sam. "You hired someone," she said. "A lawyer. For us." David opened his mouth, but Maria didn't give him the chance. "Why didn't you ask me? Why go behind my back?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was hurt. David let out a long breath. "Because I knew what you'd say. And I also knew I'd still do it." Maria shook her head. And for the first time since he'd met her, the steady composure cracked. "We're not a cause, David. We're not some problem to fix." "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't do this because I see you as helpless. I did it because you're her mother. And I know what it feels like to almost lose a child." The words hung in the air like something too heavy to move. Maria blinked, then looked away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. Resigned. "I've spent years teaching Lila to keep her head down. To not stand out. To protect herself by disappearing. And now she's suddenly known. Seen. Because she saved your son's life." David nodded. "She didn't just save him. She reminded him he was worth saving. She reminded me, too." Maria pressed her hand to her chest like she was holding something steady inside. Her eyes shimmered, but she held back the tears. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "I don't know if this lawyer will change anything. But thank you for trying." The tears came then, quiet, not broken, but slow and real. David stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "Whatever happens, you're not going through it alone. Neither is she." Maria nodded once, and for a moment they stood side by side, not as strangers, not as roles, but as parents bound by fear and love for the same girl. Meanwhile, Lila sat in the back of the science lab, a scholarship letter folded in her pocket like it was something dangerous. 2 days earlier, she'd been named a finalist for a summer astrophysics program at the university. Prestigious. Rare. A chance most kids dreamed of. Her mother had found the letter first and left it on Lila's bed with a note, "You earned this. Don't hide from it. But Lila had hidden anyway. She hadn't emailed back, hadn't told anyone, not her mom, not David, not even Sam. Because underneath the pride was fear. What if her undocumented status ruined it? What if showing up meant questions she couldn't answer? So she stayed quiet? But David found out anyway. He showed up at her school, holding the printed orientation agenda. "You're going," he said gently. "You don't understand," she argued. "It's not just a form or a classroom. What if someone asks questions we can't answer?" He didn't argue back. He just said, "Then I'll be there with you." On the drive, she sat tight-jawed, hands tucked under her legs like she was holding herself together. David didn't push. He only said, "You're allowed to be afraid. But you don't have to be afraid alone." When they arrived, she froze at the entrance. "They're going to see me," she whispered. "Really see me." David met her gaze. "Good. It's about time." Inside, the room buzzed with professors, judges, and other students. Lila walked to the front, shoulders stiff, every step heavy with doubt. But when she began to speak, something shifted. She talked about gravity, not just as force, but as connection. How things could pull on each other across impossible distances. "Some things," she said, her voice growing steady, "don't have to be close to matter. They shape each other anyway, just by being there." The room went quiet. Still. Listening. Because she wasn't just giving a science talk. She was telling the truth. From the back, David watched like he was witnessing something sacred. Lila wasn't just smart. She was radiant when she spoke her truth. Not loud. Not flashy. Just undeniable. When she finished, the applause didn't come right away. People sat still, taking it in. Then the clapping started, steady, sustained, earned. Lila stepped down, shaky but glowing. "I didn't think I could do that," she whispered. "You didn't think you were allowed to," David said. "But you are." Later that night, Maria asked how it went. Lila didn't give details. She just curled into her mother's side and whispered, "It was okay. I was seen." Maria kissed her daughter's head and held her close. Meanwhile, across town, David reread her speech in his inbox. He thought about gravitational pull. About light years. About things far apart still shaping each other's lives. A girl. A boy. A father. A mother. None of them perfectly aligned. Yet all orbiting something bigger than themselves. And for once, David didn't try to manage it. He let himself be moved. The following week, after hesitating a dozen times, he finally sent the text. "Dinner at my place. Just something simple. You're both welcome." Maria responded politely, "We'll come." "Thank you?" Lila never replied. But on Saturday evening, when the doorbell rang, David opened it to find them both there. Maria in a clean blouse, ironed by hand. Lila clutching a plastic container with both hands. "It's just tortillas," Maria said as she stepped inside. "We don't come empty-handed." David smiled, genuine. "I'm glad you're here." Lila glanced around the house, quiet eyes taking it all in. Not judging. Not criticizing. Just observing. Everything in David's house looked spotless. Maybe too spotless, like it had been arranged for show instead of lived in. The dining table could easily seat 10, but tonight there were only 4. Even so, it felt wide, formal, almost intimidating. Still, David didn't apologize. He wanted this to feel real, not like an act of charity, but the start of something new. Sam came slowly down the stairs, grinning, holding a folded drawing. "I made a moon for the table," he announced, laying it beside the napkins. Lila's face lit up. "That's Phobos, right? The crater looks perfect." Sam beamed. "Took me an hour." Just like that, the tension in the room melted. Maria set her tortillas in the middle of the table as if she were placing something sacred. David had only made pasta from a box, nothing fancy, but the smell filled the air and nobody complained. For about 30 seconds, the 4 of them sat in awkward silence. Then Lila cracked a joke about Sam's mismatched socks. Sam fired back with a story about the time she'd spilled glue in her hair at the hospital. They were laughing before the food even touched their plates. Real laughter, the kind born out of safety. David caught Maria's eyes across the table. Her hands rested lightly in her lap. She gave him a small, knowing nod. This moment, unexpected as it was, carried a weight they both understood, hard-earned connection. Midway through dinner, Sam dribbled sauce down his shirt. Lila burst out laughing, until she dropped her own fork, splattering marinara across her hoodie. "Karma!" she muttered, shaking her head. Maria just smiled, grabbing a napkin to help blot her sleeve. David sat back and let it all happen. For the first time since his wife Leia had passed, his dining room was noisy again. Not chaos, just presence. At one point, Lila leaned toward Sam and whispered something about black holes. He whispered back about wormholes he'd learned from a YouTube video. David didn't understand half of it, but it didn't matter. They had their own language, one he couldn't translate but loved to hear. After dessert, just some leftover bakery cookies, Sam piped up. "Want to see my telescope?" Maria started to decline, but Lila was already on her feet. "Absolutely." Out on the patio, Sam showed her the telescope David had bought weeks earlier but hadn't yet set up. Lila and Sam crouched over it, fiddling with the lenses like young mechanics. The clouds had rolled in, blocking the stars, but Sam didn't care. "Even just aiming feels cool," he said. From the doorway, Maria watched with a softened expression. David came to stand beside her. "You know," he murmured, "I've worked hard my whole life, but I don't think I've ever felt rich until right now." Maria turned to him, her eyes unreadable but steady. "Rich isn't what you have," she said softly. "It's what you give room to grow. Tonight you gave her that space to just be a kid. She doesn't open up easy. She's had to guard too much of herself." David swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's extraordinary." Maria smiled faintly. "She always has been. Most people just never bothered to notice." Later, after everyone left, David returned to the kitchen. The plates were stacked, the napkins tossed, the pasta bowl scraped clean. But one thing new caught his eye. On the fridge, just beneath a photo of Sam and Leia, was a small handwritten note, tucked under a Saturn-shaped magnet. "Thank you for seeing me." No signature. No explanation. David stood there with wet hands, staring at the note like it was something rare and fragile. It wasn't a thank you for dinner or kindness, it was thanks for being seen, fully, with no agenda. Carefully, he slid the note from the magnet, folded it, and tucked it into his wallet where he used to keep business cards. As he closed it, he knew something simple and absolute. Moments like this were rare, but powerful enough to change the pull of an entire life. Months passed. Life shifted. Slowly at first, then all at once. Sam grew stronger with a quiet persistence that surprised even the doctors. Therapy no longer drained him, it lit him up. He joked more, ate more, even walked without being asked. The hospital was no longer his world. And through it all, Lila remained constant. She visited after school, slipping books or paper models from her duct-taped backpack. Sometimes it was an article about black holes, sometimes just her presence. They didn't need much. Time. Laughter. Quiet. David stood back, learning at last that his role wasn't to guide but to protect the space they'd all built. Then came the letter. Maria's protected status had been granted. No more late-night dread. No more knocks at the door. When David read the notice, tears filled his eyes. Maria simply folded the paper, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Now we breathe." The next milestone came fast. Lila's scholarship. Not a finalist this time, the finalist. A full ride to a summer astrophysics program in Arizona. University labs. Real telescopes. Professors whose books she'd only seen in second-hand stores. She showed the letter to David, clutching it in both hands, stunned. "They picked me," she whispered. David laughed. "Of course they did." They're just catching up. Maria cried quietly and cooked a celebratory meal that filled the apartment with warmth. Sam, though, grew quiet. He didn't ask why she had to go. He already knew. Instead, he asked how long. Just the summer. Lila promised. Then I'll be back. But they both knew something would be different. Not broken, just shifted, like a new orbit forming after gravity had changed. On the night of her departure, they drove to the hill overlooking the city, the same hill where they'd once watched meteor showers. Rosa carried a thermos of hot chocolate. David drove. Sam held something hidden beneath his jacket. When they arrived, Lila stepped out, her eyes sweeping the skyline as if trying to memorize it. You won't see as many stars in Arizona, Sam said softly. Too much desert light. It's okay, she smiled. I'll bring my own. They stood there in silence, the four of them, breathing the moment in. Then Sam turned and handed her the small box he'd hidden. Inside was a silver locket etched with constellations. The stars are where they should be, he explained nervously. That's your favorite one, Andromeda. Lila stared at it, her lips parting. Sam, you helped me find the stars again, he said simply. She knelt, pressing her forehead to his. You were never lost. You just forgot how to look. David stood back, hands in his pockets, his heart pounding with gratitude so strong it almost hurt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. At the bus stop, goodbyes came quietly. Lila hugged Sam tight, whispered something just for him, then clung to her mother in a way that spoke louder than words. Finally, she faced David. For a second, he thought she might say something. Instead, she just gave him a steady nod. He nodded back, swallowing hard. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. They were already written. The bus pulled away, brake lights glowing red in the night. The three of them, David, Maria, and Sam, stood watching until it disappeared into the curve of the road. Above them, the sky was scattered with faint stars. David looked up, then down at his son, who still clutched the empty locket box. For the first time in years, he felt his heart settle. Like a missing piece had finally returned home. He whispered, almost to himself, "Thank you for bringing her into our orbit."